Episode 6 now of Take Pride in the Lions, and joined again by David Flatman after another very close test. So it was 2 points to the Lions in the first test, 1 point to Australia in the second test. These games couldn't be any closer, but did you feel the Lions were unlucky on Saturday?
I didn't necessarily, no. I think there's a bit of luck. I think the better team were Australia last Saturday in the second test. I think the Lions were unlucky in that they conceded such valuable points at the scrummage in the first half. I know they turned it around and they gained penalties, I think towards the end of the first half and certainly into the second half, because I think that was just incorrect refereeing. It's easy for me to say, having played there for so many years, but it seemed pretty obvious to me what was happening. So I think if you look at the points they gave away early in the game, or they conceded early in the game, you could call them unlucky, but actually Australia for me looked more threatening ball in hand and looked to have a few more ideas in attack, while the Lions were superb in defence except for that 1 nanosecond when Adam Ashley Cooper went through to score the winner.
How much... We shouldn't forget that the Lions... These have been very close games, as I said, but actually the Lions are playing away from home. They're playing Australia in Australia, and yet they're only losing... Well, at the weekend they only lost by 1 point. That in of itself, the fact that these games are so close, is a testament to how good, or to the level at which they must be playing.
It is, yeah, but that's not much consolation really. It's playing for, having played for England a couple of times myself, and I still never played in a bigger game than Gloucester Bath. At Kingsholm, they were still the biggest games I played in, I felt, in terms of pressure. And losing by a point at Gloucester doesn't feel good. You don't feel good about yourself because you've managed not to lose by that many. Winning's all that matters, and it doesn't matter if they're coming close. The Lions need to do better than coming close on Saturday. They need to find a way to beat Australia in Australia. Very, very difficult. You're right, they're doing a very, very good job, but all that counts is whether that job is ultimately good enough or not.
One of the men who will have undoubtedly felt the worst at the end of that defeat was Lee Halfpenny, who had a chance to win it at the end. I say a chance, it seemed to me to be a ridiculously long way out for him to kick, a superhuman effort after he'd put everything on the line during the 80 minutes.
He will feel awful about himself, and of course he had 80 tough minutes in his legs by the time he took that kick, and that's what a lot of people don't realise. I was always very glad I wasn't a goal kicker, because that time was invaluable to me as rest. Maybe wasn't fit enough. I definitely wasn't fit enough. But having to place kicking and throwing into the line out, I think, are the two most difficult skills in rugby. Line out and throwing being the most difficult. But I think no one thinks any less of him for missing that, except himself, inevitably. And he will be very self-critical. Most pros are, but that's why he's playing for the Lions.
I heard David Campese after the game say that he thought that the Lions should have taken a quick tap and go, and they should never have let Lee Halfpenny kick.
Yeah, but if they'd taken a quick tap and go, they'd have said he'd say they should have kicked the points. I think Campo just likes to disagree for the sake of it. I think I think they call it Oppositional Defiance Disorder. And the few times, the days I've spent with Campo, I think he certainly suffers from a bit of ODD. If you tell him it's 2:30, he'll tell you it's not. Whether your watch says it is or not. I completely disagree. I think the captain looks at Halfpenny, and if Halfpenny says I have a go, and he's probably the best goal kicker on the planet at the moment, certainly at test level, if he nods, you give him the go. If he says no, you tap and go, or you go for the corner if you have time. So you go for territory if you have time. Now, I absolutely agree with the decision to take the kick. How often does a quick tap work at test level in your own half? Well, it worked for Will Genia in test 1, but the reason that's such a standout moment is because it works so rarely. And the reason it worked is because the Lions switched off in defence effectively, and never in their careers will those Australians have been on higher alert defensively than at that second. So your chances of getting all the way up the field and scoring are slim. You can work your way up and go for the drop goal, of course you can, but the odds of that working are slim. This is a guaranteed shot at goal, and it just didn't work out. Now,
there was a lot of talk before the game about the scrum. One of the good things about these Lions tests is that they bring a lot of people into rugby who otherwise don't follow the game because they're such a big occasion. So for a lot of the lay people, of which I count myself as one, who was sat there watching the game, we hear a lot about the technicalities of the scrum and a lot of conjecture about the performance of Mako Vunipola. At the start of that game, he seemed to be singled out by the referee. What was going on there? Given your experience, what was going on? What was the referee seeing? And what was your take on what Vunipola was doing?
This is a tough one for me because, as a British person, as soon as I defend sort of a seemingly persecuted British Lion, it seems a bit obvious. But I'm not bothered about that. Mako isn't the best scrummager in the British Isles. We know that. That's not news. But he is a decent scrummager. What was happening was that the Australian front row are effectively... They're going so low that it's impossible to hold them up. So for some reason, some referees think it's the loosehead prop's job, so Mako's job to hold up his opposite number. Well, it's not. It's his own job to hold himself up. So if he is propelling himself as a 19-stone powerhouse with another 19-stone powerhouse beside him and an 18 one, behind him and an 18-stone powerhouse next to him on either side, if he wants to shoot at his opposite number's kneecaps or at his shins, then he can, and he's difficult to stop. Why should Mako Vunipola have to hold him up? You could argue that Mako should have got a bit lower, but no loosehead prop on the planet could have held up Ben Alexander when he's firing in that low at that trajectory. And for me, it was completely obvious. They were trying to bore in and go across a little bit, so the tight head prop was trying to head towards the hooker. That's fine, happens all the time, but at some point it was at such an angle that Mako Vunipola's kind of spat out the side. He's kind of irrelevant in the scrum. Well, actually, you can argue that he should follow him in and attack him, but actually, as soon as he did that and got underneath Ben Alexander's outside shoulder and moved across, he was penalised, rightly, for scrummaging on the angle, boring in. But what else is he supposed to do? Just let the guy disappear and scrummage on his hooker instead? At one point, Ben Alexander was almost, when he should have been scrummaging effectively with his back parallel to the touchline towards the opposition, the Lions try line, he was almost heading towards the touchline himself. So he's at that big an angle. It was way beyond 45 degrees. He was almost heading across the front row. How Mako Vunipola is supposed to scrummage on that, I don't know. Also, the Australians hit hard, and when they got a good hit, they tried to follow it through with momentum and keep driving. They did that, but they did it before the ball was in. Now, if you're the team putting the ball in and you get a hit that good, you quickly pop it in and let the guys walk over it because momentum's there. It's a bit cheeky, but it's what scrums have been doing for the last 5 or 10 years anyway. It's called the hit and go technique. That's why most penalties come on your own ball. You garner most on your own ball. The Australians were pushing so early that Ben Youngs, as would any scrum half on the planet, including Will Genia, looked at the ref and said, I cannot put the ball into this, it's going backwards. So he penalised him for not putting the ball in. So he's having to put the ball into a scrum which is moving backwards before the ball has come in. It doesn't get any earlier than that. There's no ball, so they're not allowed to push yet. So the next time it came around, he was forced to put the ball in to a retreating scrum, and they duly lost the ball. So it was just, for me, it was just no common sense, and it looked like the refs have a very tough job, and I'm very reluctant to criticise referees, but it looked like that referee had read the papers, listened to what people like Bob Dwyer were saying, that Mako Vunipola was going to struggle in the scrum, and just lived up to it and delivered what everyone thought was going to happen. And for me, he was wrong.
Do you think it's a difference in interpretation between northern and southern hemisphere?
Someone's diving at the floor, they're going to land on the floor. So I always found it strange at one point, Ben Alexander was lying flat on his face as if he was in bed. And Mako Vunipola, all right, his head is halfway up his backside and but he's on his feet. I don't understand how he's penalised for being on his feet when his opposite number, he didn't move out, he didn't duck out of the way of the engagement. He wore the engagement on the back of his head because he was a bit high, technically, but because the Australians were shooting so low. And you remember Andrew Sheridan destroying a guy called Matt Dunning, the Australia front row, at Twickenham, and there's that famous image of him going nose to nose with him, and it kind of made Sheridan, as a name. Actually, what happened next time around was that England got done over by Australia at Twickenham. I was there watching, and what they did, Al Baxter and co, think it might have even been the same Stephen Moore and Ben Robinson, the same hooker in loose head. They effectively dived at the floor, at the kneecaps of Sheridan, and all day he was getting penalised because he wasn't holding it up. The scrum was going down because he was just, he wasn't holding up the Australia front row. They were moving forward as they went down, so they kept getting the decisions. But if I dive at your kneecaps, what are you going to do about it? It's it frustrated the hell out of me, I must say. Equally, there were scrums where the Australians legitimately dominated, fine. But, I did feel, I don't know Mako personally, but I did feel for him because I felt he was stitched up. And
he played the full 80 minutes, and I don't think I've certainly never seen him play the full 80 minutes for England. So, I mean, he looked absolutely out on his feet by the end of it.
Yeah, but you watch him, out on his feet, he's still making tackles. Unbelievable, still carrying the ball. I think, quote me on it and tell me if I'm wrong, I think he had the top number of carries and the top number of tackles for any Lion on the field. Any forward on the field. The top number of tackles, I believe, and the top number of carries for any forward. He is a stunning rugby player, absolutely outrageously fit. I mean, for someone who looks like a 50-year-old who works in a shop, right? Let's face it, doesn't look athletic. His speed, balance, poise, skill, and somehow his engine is unbelievable. And I remember talking to Graham Rowntree about him a couple of months ago in London. He just said the bloke doesn't seem to get tired. He said, I don't know where he gets it from. He just keeps going and going and going. And even into the 80th minute, he was accruing stats. He was tackling and carrying. So, he came through one hell of a test at the weekend. Brutal.
If Corbusiero's fit, will he start?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Most awkward, most destructive, most aggressive scrummager. The Lions need momentum to get their power game launched. Without Corbusiero firing in the front row, without Jamie Roberts, I don't think they'll win.
One player who won't be playing on Saturday, of course, is Captain Sam Warburton. How much of a loss do you think he is?
Yeah, huge. He was the best player on the field until he went off, I thought. He really, really... It's the best I've seen Warburton play in a year. He was really, really good. Staunch in defence, very intelligent in attack, sort of selfless, doing an awful lot of work, but just his communication and his athleticism, helped that team, and got world-class replacements all through that squad. But I think, you pick a captain because he's a special player, and they'd be all right if O'Connell hadn't dropped out, but he's out as well. I think that's big. That's big for the Lions.
So who will take Warburton's place on Saturday?
I think Heaslip will probably stay at 8. I'll be tempted by Faletau, but I think Heaslip will probably stay. Lydiate versus Croft for 6 is a very difficult one because I think they add very different things. Lydiate is purely a defensive animal. His style of tackling isn't the most explosive style. He's not necessarily like a South Sea Islander the way he bangs people, but he stops people dead in their tracks. There's very few people gain any momentum through or around Dan Lydiate. So what that means is a player who is tackled who looks like he's been chopped like a tree, his legs just disappear, which is what Lydiate does. He chops them, makes it very, very easy for his surrounding defenders to get in over that ball. So it's no surprise that at one point the Lions were 6-1 turnovers ahead of the Aussies. Warburton looking great with the turnovers, Heaslip looking great, everyone looking great with the turnovers. Well, it's got a lot to do with the way Lydiate tackles. He just chops people. So that also makes it very difficult for his supporting players, for the supporting Australians who are expecting their ball carrier to gain momentum. They all overrun it and they can't be too effective in the ruck, or as effective. So whereas Tom Croft adds kind of everything. He's kind of good at everything. Very, very tough one. I think Lydiate will probably keep his place, and I think although Sean O'Brien was on the bench, obviously there's a good chance he'll start at 7. That's probably who they'll pick, but there's a good chance. I think I would be tempted to go with Justin Tipuric, something different, and actually add a real athletic dimension to what Lydiate brings on the other side. I think he's a potential star of the third test.
Without Warburton and without O'Connell, the Lions are going to need a captain for this third and final match to get them over the line. Who can you see replacing Warburton with the captain's armband?
I think probably Brian O'Driscoll. He's the obvious choice. Although it would excite me to see a midfield of Jamie Roberts and Manu Tuilagi. That would excite me. I hope Manu's at least on the bench. I think Brian O'Driscoll has to be the guy, really. Sexton's in a pivotal position. He slips very, very experienced. Alan Wynne-Jones, very, very experienced. I'm biased. I always like to have a captain up front. I just always like to have a captain with, bleeding ears and dirty knees. I like that. But then you could argue that you can't quite see the bigger picture when your head's halfway up your backside. So there's arguments for both. I think it's likely to be Brian O'Driscoll.
And finally, then, do you think the Lions have got a chance on Saturday?
Yeah, absolutely. But their plan A is their only plan, really, and that's fine. But it needs momentum. It needs a set piece moving forward. It needs a pack on the front foot. It needs momentum and gain line puncturing through penetration through the midfield. O'Driscoll and Jonathan Davis didn't achieve that last weekend. They were well defended, and the pack didn't really achieve that either. So it's a very, very important game for Alex Corbacero if he's fit, and if Jamie Roberts comes back in, it's the biggest game of his career, because they, for me, are the two players that get the Lions back on the front foot where they were for periods of the first test.
But they need those players back.
Yep, they do. And for me, if they don't have them, Manu could do that job, could do the Jamie Roberts job, he could do that. I don't think there's another loosehead prop that can do what Corbacero can do on that trip, certainly since Cian Healy went home.
Well, this is turning out to be an iconic test series. It would be... We all went through the ringer on Saturday, but it would be incredible if they could win that third and final test. So I suppose our closing words today are: in bod we trust.
In bod we trust, yeah.
Thank you, David.
Cheers.